Welcome to Elder Tales. I'm your host, Dr. Andrew Corrin, and this is another story from my collection of award-winning short fiction, This Old Stick. Our lives are dynamic. They surge and sway in the currents of people and experiences around us. We all have secrets we try to keep hidden as the waves seek to wash us bare, and sometimes life traumas weaken our resilience and bring those concealed stories to the surface. Listen to the healing that comes as this family struggles with such a tide of change. This is Secrets.
"Step back, sir. Step back now." His peaked hat in hand, the usually impressive authority of the officer's blue uniform, black boots, and bulky stab vest seemed to go unnoticed. The instruction failed, his words appearing ineffectual in front of him like the clouds of fake tear gas they had practiced with at police college. The frigid July night air, sliced by a shaft of light from the house, seemed to mock him as he moved in to separate the three figures and guide them back inside. The call had come at the end of a long shift, just as the young officer was driving back to the station. His role as a community constable was a job he enjoyed, mostly. Being a familiar face and feeling like he was making a positive impact was what he had signed up for. But domestic disturbances, like the one that had been called in, were a fact of life. The duty sergeant, apparently deciding that responding to a 5F wasn't in the job description of anyone else on the roster, had assigned him to the call-out. He had turned his car and, under lights and sirens, headed for the address. Now, standing around the side of the house, he reached with his free hand to his left shoulder to press the RT. "Comms, I need an ambo, code 2. The woman in her 50s was bleeding. He knew because her dark hair was shiny and her face more shadowed than it should be. She was being supported elbow to elbow by her elderly mother, although it wasn't clear who was holding up whom. The red and blue light show of his parked vehicle, the misty street lamps, driveway security spot, and nosy shards peeking through neighbors' thinly parted curtains all tried to embarrass him.
He hated being the center of attention and moved with urgency to get the disturbance inside where it was warmer and more private.
"He didn't mean it, Sarah. He really didn't, my darling." The words kept going round and around in Kath's head, and only escaped her lips between sobs as she tried to reassure her daughter. Her peach-coloured dressing gown was heavy as she barely caught enough breath to hold herself up against Sarah's sticky elbow. The officer got himself between them and a glowering elderly man named Clive. Then, walking backwards to keep an eye on the assailant, began shepherding the two women towards the safety of the laundry door. Kath knew the concrete steps, slippery with winter moss, were somewhere just ahead. "For God's sake, I can't see them," she complained to no one and everyone. Her cataracts were made worse by tears. They felt hot, almost scalding in the night air. Dr. Fisk had said something at a recent visit about cataracts being like looking through a waterfall. Kath felt angry at him for being flippant and right at the same time. She was so over the night's nonsense and the familiar shouting and weeping that seemed to be the only way her family communicated these days. "Mum, careful!" Sarah pulled at her elbow just as Kath kicked the bottom step. They got themselves up, all three of them, through the entranceway and into the lounge without having to let go of each other. Kath's gaze lingered on a pile of unfolded washing, and she worried about the officer seeing all their socks and underwear. The two women collapsed into the untidy cushions on the red leather sofa. Clive and Kath had bought that for their golden anniversary, thinking they were so adventurous and bold. "Lucky we chose that colour with the mess Sarah's leaving on it," thought Kath. She held Sarah tight as Clive, intercepted at the door, was directed into the dining room by the officer. Kath stared at the pile of laundry anxiously.
"Get that bitch out of my house! Get her out now!"
Clive yelled from the recycled Remu dining table. Sarah looked up from her mum's protective shoulder to see him banging his fist into the aged timber, with the constable doing his best to keep him sitting. There was nothing the officer could do to stop her father's slurred verbal torrent.
Judgment Day is coming, and the goats will be cast into the fires of hell.
He paused briefly to wipe saliva from the left side of his mouth.
Your sins have removed your name, Sarah, from the Lamb's Book of Life.
Sarah's thoughts were spinning and her head throbbing. All she wanted to do was go home to bed, or maybe vomit, then go to bed. But she remembered that her father had thrown her car keys into the veggie patch. It would be too dark to find them tonight. She knew she would stay with Mum, and Dad would have to spend the next few days at Jim's place. The rest of the evening was a muddle of events for Sarah. Paramedics, then Jim and Doreen, an emergency department fracas, then back to Mum and Dad's place. Dad had gone with Jim, and Doreen took Mum for a cuppa in the kitchen, whilst Constable, Sarah couldn't recall his name, sat across from her at the Remu table. She tried to focus her attention. "I don't want to press charges," she insisted. "He doesn't know what he's doing since his stroke." Sarah couldn't stop herself getting angry at the officer. He was just doing his job. But it was past midnight, her head was still throbbing, and everyone just needed some sleep. The constable was tired. He had worked 4 hours past the end of his shift and knew he would have to write up the incident, or at least make some notes to do the formal report tomorrow.
The victim wasn't really helping. She didn't want to press charges, which he could sort of understand, given the fact that it was her father and all, but the man had made a mess of her, and he remained at large in the house next door.
The neighbour looked like he could handle Clive, but the officer knew that there was every chance he would be called to the same 5F tomorrow, with the duty sergeant making a note about poor decision-making in his logbook. The young constable knew he had to get this right. He pulled out his notebook and black pen to make the entry. 017, 14 July. These notes are obtained from statements made by Sarah Cook, alleged victim, and corroborated by her mother, Kathleen Sluter. The alleged victim is the daughter of the alleged assailant, Clive Sluter, who accused her of not repaying a debt of $5,000. The assailant gained access to the victim's car keys and threatened to sell her car to repay the debt. The victim then attempted to remove said keys from the assailant, whereupon he struck her on the head with his walking stick and threw the keys into the garden. A neighbour, Jim Dean of 61 Station Road, made the call to 111 at approximately 20:35 hours, with Community Constable Rivers arriving on location 59 Station Road at 20:47 hours. Rivers looked back to Sarah, whose face was the same colour as the cold milky tea in front of her. "I'll fill in the rest tomorrow. I just need to confirm again that you are safe and do not want to press any charges." He knew what her weary answer would be, but he needed to ask one more time. She nodded slowly and drank from her cup in silence. "Sarah's a good daughter." Kath's strained and weary voice escaped from a hushed kitchen conversation with Doreen. "She has her moments, but so have we all." It was the stroke that had changed everything. Kath remembered that dreadful day like it was yesterday, forcing her way into the ED cubicle, past the busy doctors and nurses rushing about in their pajama uniforms. All of them were too busy to care about the frothy dribble exploring its way down from the sagging left side of Clive's mouth, or that his privates were uncovered. His eyes had been watery and his tongue dry, but he managed to recognize her and mumble,
"What the fuck happened? And where's the bitch who took my smokes?"
Kath hadn't been sure what to be more alarmed about, the fact that he was smoking again, or his language. Clive had always said, "There's only room for one vice per person, so choose wisely." He never swore, drank, gambled, hit anyone, or read girly magazines. He smoked. He thought Kath didn't know and blamed his mates for the smell on his golf clothes. But she always knew when she kissed him. Dr. Fisk had told him that his blood pressure and cholesterol were too high and that he was in line for a heart attack or stroke if he didn't quit the smokes. Clive and Kath had had one of their biggest arguments when they arrived home. He was upset that she knew his secret and that she had told the doctor. So he stopped. That's what she always admired about Clive. When he set himself to do something, he did it. But that stroke had changed her husband. He went from being a man whose favourite thing was to sit in his cane chair on the deck, listening to and solving people's problems, to being an angry, irritable person who couldn't sit still, finding fault with everyone and everything, especially Sarah.
Kath didn't know why he always picked on her. He would go on and on about some $5,000 she owed him.
And then there was the religious stuff. Clive had never had time for church or God, some kind of reaction to his strict upbringing. But after the stroke, everything was about abomination or demons or the vengeance from the horsemen of Revelation. They say a stroke can change the way a brain works, and Clive's was completely messed up. Clive and Sarah had had some right old arguments about that money, but thankfully they had never come to blows until now. Sarah was sure that Mum never knew, and Dad had kept their secret like it was a treasure, buried somewhere long forgotten. It had been over 30 years since he had last spoken of it.
"Sir, you listen to me,"
he had said. Sarah and Clive had been sitting on his favourite cane outdoor furniture, drinking grape juice straight from a sweating glass bottle.
"What you do with your life is your business, but don't ever remind me of what we just did."
They were celebrating, but he was being too serious for her to be having fun. He had just looked hard and deep at her, then reached for the bottle as Mum came back out with the chips and dip. That was the end of them talking about Sarah's break in Southland. Kath had thought her daughter had followed a boy and got a job waitressing for a couple of years, which had been true for the first month, until her boyfriend got involved with a commune called Saints of Hope, run by a man they called the Shepherd. She had gone along with it because she loved her boyfriend. The place seemed like a bit of a laugh to begin with, all those earnest goody-goodies wearing outdated clothes and singing songs about glory land and harvesting souls. But when it got weird, Sarah wanted out. That's when her boyfriend raped her. He told her it was God's will and purpose. She had managed to ring her father, and he came down and threatened to go to the police. The Shepherd said she could leave if her father paid $5,000 and signed a gag order drawn up by some lawyer. Sarah got really sick after the abortion. Dad just told Mum that Sarah had lost her job, gotten depressed, and needed some time to herself before coming home. Kath saw Doreen out the front door and wilted into the chair opposite Sarah, puffing out her cheeks with the effort. "Mum, don't be mad at him," Sarah said quietly after the silence became uncomfortable. "He's a good father." And into the small hours she shared their secrets.